Yeah, see, Rick, my dad was in the Army, and my
Ready?
brother was in the Army, and so that's why I joined the Navy. I had to be different.
Good afternoon. Welcome to a joint meeting of the Old Carver City Council and the Old Carver Planning Commission. I'd like to start it off by introducing our newest member to the Old Carver Planning Commission, as approved last night by City Council, Eric Mann. Perhaps we could go around the table and the rest introduce ourselves. I'm Mayor Bob Severance, Mayor Pro Tem.
Dennis McCown, Mayor Pro Tem.
Erica Wassinger, City Council.
Jim Campbell, City Council.
Joel Stravidius, City Council.
Greg Wassinger, Planning Commission.
Rick Holmberg, City Council.
Rich Freeman, Planning Commission.
Cecil Pierce, Planning Commission.
Al Huddy, Planning Commission.
Dennis Lefevre, Senior Planner, Development Services.
Brad Booth, Staff Engineer.
Okay, we have a couple more in the audience that are staff members. So we've got Dr. Doug Merriman as our city administrator, Kathy Rosen, Director of Public Works, and we have our Development Services Director, Steve Powers. So with that said, I call the meeting to order. And, we have somebody just coming in. Tara Heisen, City Council, just joining us. And it's my understanding Beth Munns should be on her way. She's had a doctor appointment and does plan to try to join us after we get started here. So I'm going to turn the meeting quickly over to our staff for LID presentation. You can tell us all about our low-impact development material here.
The document, so to speak. First of all, does everybody have a copy of the proposed amendment in front of you? Staff, I sure does also. First of all, I'd like to thank you, the Planning Commission Chair, and the members of the City Council and Planning Commission for taking this time and opportunity to give us this presentation and kind of take it to the next step with this LID code amendment process. The steps that we would like to take for our presentation is give you a brief overview of where we've been. Most of that you have seen already as far as presentations that we've given you in the past months. Essentially look at some of the basics that we looked at as far as putting this code amendment together, and then discuss as an overview what's in this code as far as proposed amendments for low impact development, and then we'd like to discuss the next steps for this project. So with that, Brad Gluth is joining me. He's a co-manager for this project. We've been working quite extensively for the last few months on this project, and assuming this will work, there we go. Just as a workshop purpose, let's go back, there we go. We'd like to discuss, obviously, this LID incorporation into our Old Carver Municipal Code, and as we have discussed with you in the past, the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System Phase 2 permit, which the city is a Phase 2 permittee, requires the city to update our code by the end of 2016 to incorporate and require LID principles to make LID the preferred and commonly used approach to site development. That's almost verbatim out of our permit. The NPDES Phase 2 permit requires the adoption of the 2012 DOE Stormwater Management Manual for Western Washington. So we have no choice. We need to adopt the 2012 manual. That manual, for your information, was also amended in December of 2014. So you'll see some references in this code package to that amended version. It's the same document. So to reiterate and kind of refresh your memories, what does low impact development really mean? Well, when we're dealing with development or parcel development, any kind of land use planning, use identification, street improvements, we're looking at dealing with stormwater, rainfall, and basically keeping that infiltrated on the site where it falls, not having it run off into detention ponds or retention basins, or collection somewhere else. It needs to be infiltrated on the site. This is not new information for you folks, but It's a refresher. Some of the basic principles that we are working under that have been identified by Department of Ecology in low-impact development use. Obviously, a reduction of impervious and hard surfaces is one of the key ones. Obviously, the hard surfaces include the roads, sidewalks, streets, even driveways, and hard surfaces now, I think, Brad, include gravel surfaces.
Yeah, parking lots, roofs. So that reduction of impervious / hard surfaces, that includes permeable pavements. So the hard surfaces is encompassing of the newer technologies like pervious concrete. And the basic push is to shrink building footprints, shrink parking lots, shrink street widths, that kind of thing.
One of the other basic tenets, of course, is vegetation preservation. There's been a lot of stress in the manual to maintain the native vegetation that might be on a site that's proposed for development. That assists in the infiltration of the stormwater that lands on the site by the vegetation. So that's something that we've incorporated into this amendment. Permeable pavements, that's been recommended to be used whenever possible to also assist in the LID mechanisms. Permeable pavements, I don't know, Brad, if you have any suggestions.
Well, permeable pavements are going to be one of the two workhorses. The 2012 Department of Ecology manual is very prescriptive. So as we're updating our code, we're trying to be as flexible as we can, but most of what we have to do is spelled out in the Department of Ecology's manual, and permeable pavements are going to be one of the workhorses of the LID requirement, as is bioretention.
Bioretention, rain gardens, those are the other key areas where we'll be looking at or have looked at to deal with the LID requirement. The process, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, sure. Just shout out if you have a question.
It's fine. You might get to this, and if you will, just let me know.
Uh-huh.
But the tenets is a reduction in impervious hard surfaces. Is there a specific goal? Like,
It's to reduce runoff.
I mean, no,
But no set
is there going to be some kind of a
specific.
standard? By such a year, every new construction development will be required to have impervious.
With
Is there a goal, or is the goal just to reduce it?
The manual that we'll adopt here as part of this process, it's rather complicated. So developments won't be cookie cutter. They'll be
Right.
very unique, each one. There's a lot of choices in the manual, but most of the choices will default down to permeable pavements and bioretention. And it's the engineer quantifies runoff and does his hydraulic modeling. Part of the process of achieving the requirements, the flow control requirements, and to put the water in the ground and not release much from the site, is part of that is reducing things that cause runoff, such as roof sizes, parking lot sizes, street widths. And even if you switch the streets and the parking lots to permeable surfaces, which falls under the hard surface definition, there's still mathematical pressures when this engineer does his modeling to reduce those surfaces. So depending which tools they use in the toolkit, if they go all permeable pavements, they can probably have a bigger parking lot. If they use the traditional pavements, it's going to be hard to have a larger parking lot. So there's not an easy way to quantify things such as the exact area or a specific number. It's
The ratio.
it's very difficult to do that. These are going to be very unique designs. Each one's going to be very design intensive, each project.
I think Brad brought up a very good point, that not one size is going to fit every situation. There's going to be pieces of the tools in the toolbox that we'll have to utilize based on the site analysis. Cecil.
Will there be different requirements for how the ground works?
Exactly. Without getting off on tangent on how the manual's structured too far, there are low-impact development best management practices that they require you to start at the top, and if infeasibility criteria applies, such as the ground doesn't perk, you move down to the next one, and so on, and you keep going down the list till one fits.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Question. On this draft, since it's prescriptive in areas, I'll take for example, excavation, Which document is going to prevail on public rights of way? Because in the excavation section, it's referring to public right of way.
Yes.
The WashDOT manual or this manual? If there's a conflict between the two.
Between the WashDOT's hydrologic manual
Yeah.
versus the Department of Ecology
Yeah,
manual?
the manual for municipal roads, bridge construction, stuff like that.
Oh, okay. Are you talking about AASHTO versus DOT design manual for street design? That has very little to do with low impact development, so I'm not really prepared. We adopted AASHTO, our code does. Now, we have Highway 20 going right through town, so where we have projects on Highway 20, we have to use the Washington State Department of Transportation design manuals and rules, which usually they meet or exceed AASHTO. That's as far as street design and street standards, but as far as low impact development, I'm not following.
Well,
Conflicting codes.
yeah, there is a conflict there because let's say somebody's doing a plat. Those streets are to be conveyed to the city upon
Right.
final completion of that plat. But has our requirements changed that the city does not follow the WashDOT manual for the public works sector in the streets anymore?
Oh, okay. You're talking about standard specifications?
Yes.
For, no, we still use that. But that has standards for per mil pavements, at least some of the standards in there. For example, the aggregate reservoir that goes under a per mil pavement, whether it's concrete or pavers or asphalt, they have a standard for that. It's called permeable ballast. They've incorporated a lot of it. I don't know if they have a specific mix design for asphalt in there now. We used to have to go find them. We haven't built one for a while, but we'll still be using that. And I'm not sure there are conflicts because they're doing the same kind of projects.
Right now, we don't know if there is a conflict, that's what you're telling me.
True, I can look into it.
So, could I chime in? Rick, one of the basic parts of, I think you know when we're applying code, we find ourselves in a situation where we have two pieces of code that apply. One is more stringent than the other.
We take the more restrictive.
We're always required to be more stringent. And so maybe another way to think about this is that since we're a phase 2 city, we have the obligation to follow these Department of Ecology standards for low impact development. And not everybody who uses the standards you're talking about fall into that category. So we're going to have some hierarchy here of rules that we have to follow. Okay? And these rules are going to have a pretty good place at the top of that list.
Thank you.
The process that we've involved in this amendment update, staff training, we've done a lot of extensive staff training. Brad, I don't know if you want to identify briefly kind of the amounts of training and the length of time that you've been involved with that, other staff as well?
I no longer remember how long it's been, but I don't know, 6-8 years. I've spent 2 years getting a WSU certification in low impact development design. Just got Department of Ecology certification for low impact development design, pervious concrete pervious concrete technician certification, and Department of Ecology inspection and maintenance certification. So I've been at this for quite a few years now.
He is indeed our resident expert on this item. We also, as part of this process, reviewed the 2011 package of amendments that the city was proactive in adopting, which dealt with a lot of aspects of low-impact development, which proved to be beneficial in this amendment process. Some of the issues that we dealt with in that package of amendments, native vegetation and screening. We also dealt with street design standards, which we're maintaining and found to be beneficial as far as meeting the requirements for low-impact development in this go-around. So that was a good move by the city to move forward with that. As I've mentioned to you in previous presentations, we had a group of internal stakeholders, folks that are actually city staff that will be working with certain aspects of low-impact development, whether it's a narrower street and a solid waste collector driving a garbage truck, or the inspection staff at Public Works, how are we going to incorporate the amount of inspections that are going to be required for these stormwater facilities later on in our process. We also had a series of meetings with our public stakeholders. As I shared with you in the past too, we've had a number of groups represented as part of this. We had the Conservation District, SICVA represented. We had a local engineer, realtor, school district represented as part of this group. One of the big things that we took away from that series of meetings was the request to at least retain some type of flexibility in the development of this code. You know, as we mentioned before, not one size is going to fit all. How are we going to be able to fit some pieces into certain developments while other pieces might work well in other developments? The primary code mechanisms, again, Brad, if you want to talk to that.
Sure. So, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, the manual we have to adopt covers a lot of what requires from an LID development. It also has a sister manual for reference. This is called the Low Impact Development. I'm drawing a blank.
Guidance manual.
Guidance manual. Thank you. Put out by the Puget Sound Partnership. Those two manuals give most of the guidance. Most of our code update is, a lot of it's things like bringing up our definitions to the current definitions from the manuals, changing the word impervious to hard surface now, since that's the primary triggers, hard surface instead of impervious. So the main things we had to look at, really, the primary considerations were these four on the screen. Our planned residential development code that we've had for years allows a lot of flexibility in how a plat is laid out, particularly in the lot size, in the lot dimensions and setbacks. Without a code change, we already have neighborhoods with zero lot line houses, townhouses where they have a yard, they have a lot, it's a plat. The plat is smaller than our standard plat lots of 7,200 square feet. So they have a choice right now to do a standard plat or a planned residential development, and that planned residential development allows a lot of flexibility. That flexibility ties to the low impact development pressures that the manual puts on development to try to save more native vegetation, try to shrink footprints, road sections, driveways, incorporate bioretention. So really our code was in pretty good shape to allow the flexibility that the new manual wants us to allow, what's called bulk and dimensional standards for basically lot size, lot setback, lot dimensions. The planned residential development has a little bit of a gap on smaller plats, and we're still looking at how to address that. That's something we're gonna get to, not today. We have some creative ideas how to incorporate them. The next,
Excuse me, what's the definition of a small one?
Generally around 2-ish acres and under, short plats, something that might be 14 lots and under, that roughly. The short plat definition is 9 and under. So the next thing we had to consider is,
I'm sorry, before we move on to that, would you mind either you or Dennis talking about the significance of the inflexibility of the regular lotting pattern, the regular subdivision? In other words,
sure,
what benefit does this provide for the Planning Commission and Council's consideration?
standard bulk conventional, 7,260 feet.
Yeah, in each of our zones, we have a minimum lot size. Typically, we have I think in the R1 zone, our smallest lot size is 7,200 square feet. So right away, as far as your platting activity, that's one of the minimum requirements that need to be met. When you look at specific parcel development, we have setbacks, which Brad has mentioned. We have minimum lot coverages, or maximum lot coverages in some cases. So those are all kind of prescriptive as far as lot development is concerned. And somehow we need to massage, well, in some cases, we could massage those bulk and dimensional requirements to help shoehorn in some of the stormwater management requirements that will be required on each individual parcel size. As Brad mentioned, our short plat process is 9 lots or less. It really will be dependent on, as far as the size of the parent parcel, would be dependent on what underlying zoning is and what the minimum lot size is for that. Anything 10 and above requires a major subdivision plat requirement. Steve, did that address?
I think it did, but I'm wondering whether the planning commission or the council have any particular questions about the significance of this. I think really what they're saying is that if we didn't have the planned residential development option, we just had the normal subdivision, which is already fairly crowded with houses, driveways, sidewalks, streets, and sort of the normal detention fashion. If you now had to try to figure out how to put new facilities in there, and at the same time shrinking all of these hard surfaces and these impervious surfaces, you can't do that in a regular plat without going through a lot of variances. Because they are prescriptive in terms of the lot size, the setback is the setback is the setback. There is no ability to vary that based upon site conditions. And so that's, I think, what Brad and Dennis are really wanting, this takeaway point for the PRD, because by its very nature, it allows for the developer to massage those lot sizes or reduce setbacks, and has a much more flexibility in terms of what that design looks like. That's what's going to let them address these features.
So, you know, I was thinking about this slide. It's really kind of the meat and potatoes of why we're here, these subjects on this slide. And Steve, can you talk about why the PRD allows that flexibility, basically the open space and the enhanced architectural standards? Can you just give an overview of that?
Sure. First of all, the planned residential development is a tool that's been around for a really long time. Initially, it used to be known as the planned unit development, and so you hear talk about PUDs and not the public utility districts. But what they really were was a tool, again, to allow creativity in subdivision design, which I think everybody believes is a good thing for a community. That flexibility, that tool, we get to apply some flexibility because in exchange for allowing the developer to vary lot sizes and vary setbacks and under our older version of our code, choose different street cross sections, they provide some additional things. So if lots are getting smaller and you're giving up that private space, it's reasonable to assume that there should be some more public open space provided as part of your project. And by public, I mean public within the neighborhood. So if you're going to have really small lots and you're giving up backyards, then you should have an internal open space system inside of that plat. So think Fairway Point or any of the other planned residential developments that we've had in our community. You're exchanging backyards for tot lots and play areas and open space trails, those kinds of things. So that's one of the basic trade-offs. The other, as Brad has mentioned, is that if you as a developer want this flexibility, then you're required to provide some additional architectural enhancements and features on your homes or in your design that if you don't want that flexibility, if you just want to develop 7,200 square foot lots in sort of the normal lotting pattern, then you don't have to do any of these extra things. And the reason that we can do this without sort of getting into a takings issue, if anybody's thinking, well, how can we make them do something above and beyond the call of duty? It's because the PRD is a choice. You're not required to use that. It's a choice that you get to use. But what we've come to learn is that this choice that we have right now will be one of the most important tools we have in order to help us meet the new standards for low impact development. Yes, Hal?
Does the net number of residences per, let's say, 10 acres increase with the PRD over what would be done in the standard 7,200 square
No,
foot?
and that's an excellent question. Thanks for asking that. And the short answer is no. The footnote to that is that there is an opportunity for a slight density bonus, but in order to get that density bonus, you have to do some extra things. So if this is your piece of property and it's your 10-acre piece, you get the same number of lots on here as a regular subdivision as you will in the PRD, but you'll have a lot more flexibility in how you lay this one out. And typically that means a lot more features inside of that neighborhood. And that's why we've seen the more recent subdivisions almost exclusively being built under the PRD rather than under the standard lotting pattern.
And also, correct me if I'm wrong, but PRDs also allow for some variance or some change in the setbacks, right?
They do. And so in a typical single-family neighborhood, you're gonna have a 25-foot front yard setback and a 20-foot rear yard, and you're gonna have a 5 on one side and you're gonna have 12 on the other. And yes, you get to choose which side you want the 5 and which side you want the 12, but that's about it. I mean, that's about the range of choices that are available to you. In the PRD, with some exceptions, you get to vary those setbacks by quite a bit. Obviously not below fire code standards or minimum building code standards, but you can offer a lot more flexibility in that design.
Thank you.
Did it cover?
Yeah.
Okay.
so-
Thanks, Steve.
So that ties with LID in the new manual in that neighborhoods won't be cookie cutter. They may not look that similar after this code is passed because it gives the engineer and the developer a lot of, it gives them latitude. It puts on more strenuous stormwater requirements, but it gives them latitude in how they incorporate the stormwater requirements. There's a list they have to pick from, but depending on the soils, slopes, and other physical constraints, one neighborhood may use primarily pervious pavements, one may have bioretention, a lot of bioretention. Another may choose to do what's called dispersion. We probably won't see that very often. That requires a lot of land set aside. But if they did a dense enough division, they could set aside a lot of forest and put the stormwater in that. So neighborhoods may look differently from one block to the next, but the PRD allows that flexibility and ties well to the new manual. So the next bullet item is that low impact development has a lot of design pressures to look at streets and basically trim any extraneous pavement out. Well, we need pavement for travel lanes, we need it for parallel parking lanes, we need it for turn lanes, we need it for appropriate turning radius. But there's definitely a lot of pressure to only have what you absolutely need. So in 2011, we looked at these pressures from LID Incorporation, and we changed our code. And we have some cookie cutter road sections that a developer can choose. You basically just choose off the shelf and go build it. It's already approvable. But we also added some the ability to not do a cookie cutter road section and design their own, as long as it met certain parameters. And we basically incorporated, if they want a minor modification, we allowed it to be an administrative approval. And if they wanted a really significant change to the street section, maybe they start saying they don't want to put sidewalks on both sides, they don't want any parking, that'd be a council approval. But the point is, we designed that mechanism in 2011 and adopted it in the code. And we've looked at it many times, and it was recently used in Marin Woods to do a 20-foot road section around their little park, and I think it worked quite well. I think I didn't see any friction on that section of the road, and we're thinking it will work quite well with LID because it gives a process for them, for the developers to approach us with these alternative sections where they may be applicable. They're not always going to be applicable, but maybe there's times where you do narrow down the road because there's nothing on one side that needs extra width. And we allowed for parking flexibility within plats in that code section. So we're not mandating parallel parking lanes. They can get out of it by going through one of these processes for alternative design, but they have to provide parking in the plat. It may be a parking court or a combination of parallel parking lanes on some of the streets in the plat. It may be a parking court, several in the neighborhood, or parking alleys in between blocks. The point is, we allowed a lot of flexibility. We think that section's working well, so we didn't have to do much to that in this code update. Any questions on the streets before I go into Title 17?
On the street width, and this is something that I see in the Fairway Point, the newest edition. They're very narrow, as you know, based on when it first started in the first phase. Now we're seeing the large trucks and the delivery trucks and moving trucks coming in, and if they're not parking on the sidewalk and the curb breaking that up, then they're blocking the street. And yes, there's no parking allowed in some of those areas. And it's pretty commonplace. But when you take into effect these large vehicles and the curves and radiuses of the streets, it becomes somewhat of a safety issue, I would think. I know it is for us already.
So I think that's a great example of one of the main pressure points that we've seen in this project. So Brad and Dennis have spent some time already this afternoon and previously telling you about this singular focus of the Department of Ecology to handle stormwater in a particular way. And obviously one of the most important ways from that perspective is to limit the number of surfaces which are creating stormwater. So there's this intense pressure on us to limit the amount of hard surface that we have in our community, because if you have less hard surface, you have less stormwater runoff, right? But coming from the other direction, we have the pressure points of trying to have livable neighborhoods, room for large vehicles and safety vehicles to move through, room just for people to have big trucks and RVs, and then parking, right? And we all know that parking can be an issue in certain neighborhoods in our community. And so this is a big struggle point, and frankly, there may be some growing pains as we try to figure out how to meet these ecology standards, but yet still meet the things that we believe are important components to neighborhoods. So that's an excellent point to raise.
Thank you.
Anything else on that?
No, I think you said it well.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Steve.
It's going to be a balance, and every community that's facing this has the same issue. We have a lot of people moving in and out though because of the Navy, so there are a lot of moving trucks here, and I can't really add much to what Steve said. I think, well, if we narrow up roads, if we go through that process, we will definitely be looking at intersections to increase the turning radius so we don't have trucks having problems at intersections trying to turn and drive over sidewalks. So these projects will be more design intensive, and we're gonna have to think out front a lot more and say, did you design the radius? Did you account for these things? And people are gonna have to adapt a bit because.
And I understand it. I'm thinking when we're having streets that are curvatures to follow, allowing the properties and their setbacks, and then the streets themselves, we could straighten out some of this in some way, might make a big difference, and then make it narrow, where there is a straight on to where safely, the vehicles and the pedestrians and everybody else can maneuver through those tight areas.
So when we did the code update in 2011, we actually changed our street pattern back towards the grid, and Fairway Point was approved, I think, 05-ish. Most of it, I think 04 was a few years after, the fourth phase was approved after that, but the initial design of 1 through 3 was approved 11 years ago before we did our code update. So now our code does point to kind of a rectilinear grid as the first and foremost layout. Obviously topography and critical areas can affect that. So that's a good point, and as we return back towards that rectilinear grid, it'll get easier.
Last point.
I guess, 2 more points. So Title 17, basically all we did in there is we basically linked Title 17, which is the building permit title of our code, to Title 12, which is the stormwater title, which adopts the new manual. And this was just for efficiency and clarity. The projects that would be required by our new manual we're adopting are required whether we adopt or put this new section into Title 17 or not. We just added clarification to make it easier for people to understand. If I need to pull a building permit, I need to go look. Even if it's a small building permit, there are still requirements. Even if it's a backyard patio, they may have some very basic requirements through the new manual about making sure when they dig out to put flagstone down that they're not releasing dirt into the stormwater system. Just things like that. Decks, minor remodels, it'll tie it to our stormwater code so that people can be informed easier that they need to be careful about what they're doing.
It was an area that we had to address simply because of the potential impervious surface creation through a regular building permit process. So, and our plating activity, whether it be a short subdivision or a major subdivision, didn't include just a building permit coming in for our review and then approval. So we had to tie it into this mechanism, which Brad mentioned would tie it into Title 12 stormwater requirements.
Okay, so, and then the last item, creation and assignment of more rigorous maintenance inspection. So the Department of Ecology is requiring that these low-impact development best management practices be placed and maintained in perpetuity. So we needed stronger language about our ability to enforce that, and that's required by the state. We have to require CC&Rs and easements for these best management practices in the neighborhoods and commercial development. So if somebody gets a bioretention facility in their front yard, basically a rain garden, they cannot fill it in. It's there forever. So the CC&Rs will instruct them about that. The easements will allow our staff to come inspect, make sure they don't fill it in. And we also added, in the past, there's requirement a certain level of project for what's called an operation and maintenance manual. So we changed our code, or our proposed code, to require a simpler operation and maintenance manual for smaller projects. It was larger projects that triggered one in the past. But we think it'll be more efficient for the people who own their houses to know what's required of them, what they're supposed to do. And also for city staff that are tasked with inspecting and enforcing that these BMPs are maintained and stay there. So we spent time reading the DOE manual, which has a lot of this language in it already, and where it didn't have the extras we wanted, like that simpler operations and maintenance manual for stormwater facilities. We added that to code, and we're not talking about books here. We're talking about a 5 or 6 page document for the smaller projects. A lot of the language is boilerplate.
I just want to comment that that's a really efficient idea. I know that in terms of inspections and enforcement and all of that, that we are a bit shorthanded in that department, and so to let people know ahead of time via CCRs or the manual what is expected of them, then that, I mean, I feel like that would eliminate half the work instead of people saying, oh, I didn't know, and then.
I think it'll save some money and prevent some frustrations.
It's a great idea.
Thank you.
We hope.
Can you go back to your previous slide there about maintenance?
Yes.
This whole process, the purpose of this process is to reduce pollutants
Yes.
downstream. That's the bottom line where we're going. Did DOE, are you familiar if DOE did any structural studies or samples of the impacts to the long-term maintenance of roadways with both pervious concretes and asphalts? The life of those, number one, because you get that same thing in the DOE manual about the gradation of the asphalt, the amount of asphalt, the temperature, all that kind of stuff. Do they do the same thing for this, or did they just say, we're going to do this and we don't really care about the structural? How about heaving?
Talking about pavement.
Yeah, and then what about patching in? When you have a roadway system that we have to do it all the time where you do overlays. So how are they recommending that you do maintenance for overlays with this process?
So you asked there's several questions. The Department of Ecology didn't do, that I know of, any structural analysis. I think they're relying on.
They did or they didn't?
They did not, that I know of. They did, most of what they look at is pollutant removal and permeability of the pavements, but the structural, they don't really get into that. There are structural analysis out there and mixed designs provided by various industries, like the concrete industry for the pervious concrete. There's a lot of engineering out there. The Department of Ecology didn't fund it or perform it. There is information. As far as maintenance, the pervious asphalt, until recently we were told you cannot overlay it, that you have to strip it down to the rock and relay it, which is a lot of work, a lot of expense. So I'm not a big fan of that. Now, probably the last year and a half, I started hearing people are saying you can overlay it, but I'm skeptical. You have to be able to bond it, and when you bond it, how are you not clogging the pores? Is it going to unravel? So I'm very skeptical of that. I would rather let some other community experiment with that than us. So I don't know about pervious asphalt, where we'll end up with maintenance. Pervious concrete is something I have a lot more faith in if it's installed properly. As far as digging up utility lines through a pervious pavement, the DOE is saying go ahead and patch it with either in kind of what was there, or just patch it with the impervious version in the pervious. So you might have pervious concrete, dig up a utility line in the future. So you have this saw cut, and they're saying it's okay to patch a trench with impervious, because I think until you do that a whole bunch, the road's still going to be pervious.
And then how about heating? You don't have full capillary action in there. You get
No.
water deposits in it, you get freeze, you get the deep freeze, and then you get the heaving.
I don't think heaving's a problem, because normally you have 10 inches to 12 inches of aggregate underneath of it. It's a reservoir for the water to store.
I'm talking about compacted, compressed snow that gets into that system, and then it gets in the thaw-freeze process.
Oh, like a spalling.
It starts spalling.
The studies, well, I'm told it's not an issue, but early on I was also told this was all much cheaper to build and maintain, and now everybody knows it's not. So I'm told it's not an issue. That's what's presented. You're not supposed to use sand with any of the pervious because it clogs. And sand doesn't degrade. If an organic gets in there, eventually it'll degrade, but sand does not degrade. So somehow you have to get it out once you get too much in there. Maybe it can be vacuumed out, maybe it can pressure wash through, but even if you pressure wash it through, you're pressure washing it into your aggregate reservoir, and after so many years of that, you're going to lose some of your storage. Luckily, we don't get a lot of snow and ice here, so we don't have a whole lot of sand. The infeasibility criteria for pervious pavements does have a limit of 400 ADT, which is average daily traffic. So that's the cumulative traffic both directions. And it's not for arterial. So we wouldn't see this on the highway yet. They're not requiring us to do it on Highway 20. It's basically for local residential. So, it is important to sand the highway. Obviously, if that's icy, the local residentials, they're going to have to we'll use the chemicals, or we'll use the sand on hills.
Chemicals we're trying to keep out of the water system.
Yeah, of course, if they're going into the reservoir, they're not going into the stream. They're going, but those are approved for use. At least they are now for current roads. I think I'm not too worried about the snow destroying it or the ice destroying it. I'm more worried about people sanding, clogging it eventually over time. I think it'll take a long time to sand, but structurally they can be built properly. Asphalt's an inferior material for roads compared to concrete. Concrete lasts much longer in this climate. In areas that maybe Chicago, concrete doesn't hold up so well. You see with freeze thaw, it gets in pores and spalls it. But that's not my primary concern. My primary concern is the ability to maintain these, because they do clog. Moss, we see them with moss in other communities. Yeah, this is a mossy, moist area. How do you keep that out? Fir needles, pine needles. And it takes specialized equipment to clean these roads. You don't use the equipment we have. You can get specialized attachments for vac trucks. So you're basically vacuuming like your living room with a big vacuum attachment, that wide one that you'd use on your floor. So it takes expensive equipment, and of course, that's just another level of maintenance. But I'm not worried about the structural.
So budget-wise, we can anticipate in the future higher maintenance road.
I believe so,
maintenance costs.
absolutely.
And to your knowledge, DOT or DOE did not do a structural vetting of this with the course of
I think they relied on outside sources where they took studies from around the world. Germany has some. There's some done in this country that they collected data and they said it's fine, that it's not an issue. I think only time will tell. There's a lot of stories, anecdotal stories of that previous asphalt raveling. I believe, I haven't been there, but I've been told by a lot of people there's a previous parking lot in Smoky Point area where from pulling to the parking stalls, we saw the front tires have done this, and then the pervious pavement has started to disintegrate. And that could be that the mix design was not done right, could have been quality control. It's certainly not something that makes you feel good about putting a lot of it down. One of my takes on asphalt is that we have enough problems with regular asphalt failing just because of the material that it is. So now we're going to possibly compromise the design, the structural design even more, even though we're told it's not compromised. I think only time's going to tell. We don't have much of a choice.
Before we move on to the next slide, would you and Dennis touch just briefly on a topic that we've already talked to the council about, which is maintenance of the bioretention facilities? We had a conversation with the council a couple of workshops ago. Is city staff going to be taking care of it, or will the HOAs be taking care of it?
The HOAs are going to take care of this decision that's been made.
And that is significant. Why?
Well, it's going to be a cost to the HOA. I mean, they already take care of the landscaping right away. It's just be a different type of landscaping. It's a little more cumbersome to maintain, and the city doesn't have the staff to take it on, and we'd have to raise rates significantly to hire more staff to do that. But those have to be maintained in accordance with the DOE manual so they function, and when they get to a level they don't function, they have to be repaired, they have to be tested, make sure the permeability is working, new soils have to be brought in, the plants have to be maintained and replaced. It's not as simple as mowing a grass strip.
So you're not jumping down there with your mower and your weed eater?
I hope not.
Yeah.
Along that same line, a lot of the developments have had HOAs in the past, but there was nothing in the code that requires that they maintain those. Unless we're bound because we have public facilities, large public facilities that have to be maintained, but some of them that had HOAs that were built that way, if they're not enforced, then they go by the wayside, and then where's your enforcement powers with that?
Do put each plat, we basically put some language on the face of the plat, which of course is a recorded legal document that says that if the HOA disbands, that basically the responsibility falls upon each individual, basically collectively. So we can go after them individually to say, you need to help maintain this.
Would it be a stronger mechanism though if we mandate that if we are approving a development with an HOA, that it be,
It can't disband.
yes, it
I
has.
think that language might already be,
I know we have it in our code. We
I
can't
think
go
it
back-
is in the CCNRs, but this is an area I need to defer to planners more on than, I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm
I'm
not
thinking
there.
about Fireside. I believe they had an HOA and it was regularly developed, but
Thanks,
it's
Steve.
gone by the wayside. So that's the mechanism for the enforcement. I believe in it. I says I believe in that mechanism of having that, but I think the code needs to stipulate that the HOA be, forever in existence. It can't go by the wayside per
I
RCW.
think most CCNRs actually say that.
It's an interesting comment, and I guess one of the questions I would have, and I don't have an answer for it, but I think one of the questions I would have is that HOAs aren't actually formed through the city, right? They are formed with the state. And I don't know that we have the ability through our local ordinance to say something which is created by the state that we could prevent it from being dissolved through inaction or actual action. But it's an interesting problem, and we'll see what we can do about that. The alternative, I think, is what Brad has said, which is that we presently say on the face of the plat that if the HOA disbands, that each individual property owner then has responsibility for his or her share of the maintenance of those common facilities. I'll also note that almost all plats these days have some sort of common facility in them. So, 20 years ago, we didn't have stormwater ponds. You might not have had a tot lot in there. You didn't have sort of landscape tracks. You just had straight subdivisions. And in today's world, every plat has common facilities which have to be maintained.
We've thought of that.
Yeah.
That's the issue.
We'll see if there's some teeth to strengthen that, because it is an issue we see when they do dissolve, and then we've got to deal with who's taking care of things. So if there's an opportunity to strengthen it, I think it's a great idea. I'm just cautious about whether we have that ability.
Bruce, we also have a challenge with so many Navy personnel being shipped off on deployment. Some of the HOAs, their president's gone for 6 months or whatever, and that's a pretty common challenge that I think is somewhat unique to Oak Harbor. That we've talked to the Department of Ecology about that, and I don't think they've really provided any guidance back. It's just something we've brought up.
We're able to deal with it because we're state mandated HOA, so we have the enforcement, but HOA, CCNRs have to be enforced on a regular basis, or they lose their enforcement of powers.
Okay.
And that's where I'm going with this, because I'm a big fan of this type of issue, but you need to have the enforcement to where it's not thrown back on the city,
Right.
because that's when it really gets to be a different issue.
Okay. Thank you.
I perhaps should have asked this question from the very beginning. I was led to believe, or under the concept, that we were, as a city, trying to get a lesser classification with the Department of Ecology than a Class 2. Is there anything about that, or is that not going to happen?
We looked into it and had a lot of discussions about it. That ship sailed a long time ago. We've had some discussions with the Department of Ecology, and there really isn't an opportunity to do that.
Something about bull trout?
Well, that was how we were pulled in originally. We didn't meet the population densities to be an NPDES Phase 2 city, and they had other criteria to label cities as bubble cities. We were one of the bubble cities. Those were ones that were brought in under this extra criteria. And the three criteria were potential bull trout habitat, shellfish habitat, and a military presence. And those were the three that they pulled us in under. But we went through the process of telling them we didn't believe we should be brought in. This is over a decade ago, I think. And that discussion continued with them for quite some time. And our internal discussions after the meeting you're talking about, we looked into it and we've talked with them, but there is no out at this point.
Forgive me for asking, what does the military have to do with, can you explain?
That's a good question, because I went to Ellensburg and talked to them directly. Another employee and I went all the way to Ellensburg and met with them, and they were under the impression back then that we had jurisdiction over the military. And when I expressed that we don't, the DOE employee told me we need to sue the Navy to bring them into compliance. And now, that has since gone wayside, and they're no longer saying that. But we do not have jurisdiction over the Navy. Neither does the State Department of Ecology. The EPA might. We do not. So,
If it's a federal agency.
right. So that, I think that criteria, I've not heard much about that criteria for a long time, and I believe it's been a while, probably 3 years, but the last time I was looking at some of those criteria, it seemed like the military presence one had kind of disappeared. It was
So
down
we're
to,
paying for their transgressions then? Is that basically?
we're still pulled in under the potential bull trout habitat and the shellfish. So yeah, 1 out of 3 might have gone away.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, what I'd like to do is just take a few minutes and kind of walk you through what the document encompasses. We are looking at amendments to 6 of our municipal code titles. Certainly Title 11, the streets and sidewalks, we discussed previously the flexibilities that we already have in our street design standards. We're going to maintain those. We also created some revisions and amendments to our excavation practices, make those consistent with the Stormwater Management Manual. Title 12, pretty much the workhorse for this. That's our stormwater title. We obviously in that title formally adopt the 2012 manual as amended December 2014. We also established the LID threshold criteria, where LID will kick in certain developments, building permits, what have you. It also ties us into the infeasibility parameters. I don't know, Brad, if you want to discuss those real quick.
So earlier I mentioned a list that the developers can choose from. It gets more complex than that, but I'm going to focus on the list because that's going to be the primary tool they use when doing these plats or commercial development. Each list has these best management practices. It starts with full dispersion, which means you set aside a huge amount of forest and put the water in there, and it has to meet certain criteria for, has to be second growth evergreen forest, it has to have certain slopes and a ratio of land that's receiving water to impervious surface feeding that. That you're not going to see much in the city. That's something that might work more in a county, a rural area. So the next one on the list for pavements is pervious pavements, and it goes on down. Each best management practice, as you go down through these lists, have infeasibility criteria. Pervious pavements, the slope of the road, the average daily traffic, like I said, above 400 ADT, that's counting both directions of traffic, does not warrant pervious pavements. Soils or groundwater table, if you have a hard pan layer that's shallow or you have high groundwater table, you wouldn't have to do it. Archaeology, you wouldn't have to do it necessarily if there was a significant archaeology site. So the feasibility criteria apply obviously differently to each item on the list. Bioretention, it's primarily the underlying soils because they're trying to get the water through the plant root zone into the underground, into the subgrade, and if it's hard pan, it doesn't go, which then you have to do something called an under drain under it. So I don't go through each one, and I'm not prepared to either, but there is infeasibility criteria. So in theory, a project could come in and they could go through this list, and maybe every single thing on the list is infeasible because the soils are horrendous and it's steep slopes and so on. So if all of those things on the list were infeasible, that project would basically be the same as they would build now. They would still have the same stormwater requirements for the detention pond that they'd have to build right now under the 2005 manual, but they wouldn't have to do all these low impact development best management practices. They're on that list. And we may see that if the soils are bad and the slopes are challenging, that kind of thing. Each site's going to be unique. We have some areas where the soils perk great. Most of our areas don't, but we do have some areas like that.
Title 17 is our building title. We pretty much discussed how we've inserted a chapter in there to deal with tying in low impact development with building permit process and new development and redevelopment that just requires a building permit. Zoning, we did some amendments to. We are looking at proposing some flexibility in our height by allowing 10 additional feet for multifamily and commercial projects, which incorporate low-impact development on site. So we're adding some flexibility in maybe shrinking that building setback or the building footprint. We are in 1931, that's the planned residential development. We've talked about that pretty much in detail, but there were some incentives in that section that we're removing, and some incentives for low impact development that actually now will be a requirement. We're looking at some revisions to our parking section in that title, stall, with this basic philosophy that the less impervious surface that you have, the better off will be for low impact development. We're looking at a reduction in stall depth by a foot. We're looking at a reduction in aisle width by a foot, and raising the percent that we allow certain parking lots for compact parking. We have 40% in our code now. We're looking at 50%.
So I'd like to just talk about that parking. This is one of the subjects that the DOE guidance asked us to look at in revising our code. And so we looked at parking a lot, and like Dennis just mentioned, our current code allows up to 40% compact spaces. And we are proposing that we bump up to 50%. And the thought process behind that is a lot of the parking lot geometry was laid out decades ago when people were driving cars such as Impalas, 1972 Cadillacs. Modern cars, they're pretty good at turning and have tight turning radiuses. They're superior in their maneuverability. So, and they're smaller. Most cars, modern cars, are much smaller. Unless you're driving a truck, I'd have 3 trucks, and when I drive my trucks, I know where to park. I don't try to park in a compact space. I think about it, and I park accordingly. So these are mechanisms, in tweaking the parking a little bit, we're trying to allow these developers who provide a needed service flexibility in meeting the LID standards, because the LID standards are chipping away another piece of their land. When you start with a piece of land, and if this is it, right now you have to have parking in a building, a stormwater pond. So if you have to add parking, a building, a stormwater pond, bioretention, and native vegetation, well, now you have less room to get your minimum parking standard, and your building is of a certain size, certain use, it's driving X amount of parking stalls. So if you can't get your parking, you can't build the building you want. And as you increase your parking, your impervious or hard surface, your pond size goes up and the need for more bioretention goes up. So it's this kind of, the more hard surface, impervious surface you put down, the more LID you need, more pond area. So if we can allow minor tweaks, like go from 40% compact to 50%, we can help a little bit. And if we can say our standard 90-degree straight-in parking stall right now is 20 feet, and what we're thinking about doing is saying where you park against a curb and it overhangs bioretention and maybe a planter, will allow you to go 19 feet. So because your car is going to overhang a little bit. Now, obviously, if you're parking against a curb that overhung a sidewalk, that would be a problem. So we wouldn't want that, because you don't want the car projecting into a sidewalk or into a building. Sometimes parking's right up against a building. But where there's a little extra space for overhang, maybe we can let them shave a foot. If you do that over 5 rows of parking, you saved several, 5, 10 feet or something, depending how many rows you have. The other option, another thing we're thinking about doing is right now, for some of our parking aisles, we require 24 feet. If we go down to 23 feet for the drive aisle between spaces, it allows them to save a little more land. And it shouldn't, we looked at other parking lot standards, and some communities go down as far as 22 feet between drive parking space aisles, rows. So saving a foot here or here over a larger parking lot may be cumulative and help get where they need to go without just basically saying, hey, you can't get your minimum parking because you can't meet your parking lot standards. Your building's gonna have to be much, much smaller, or you just can't do your projects. We're trying to give that flexibility and not have a parking crisis.
So the parking stall existing is grandfathered, is that correct?
Well, they're in code right now, and Dennis and I looked at other communities, and we don't want to shrink them much, because you need to be able to park, not have your car dented, and you need to be able to get in and out of your car. But the average car size has shrank a lot since the standards were set. Now, there are big trucks and vans, and they're needed. People have, there's car.
I guess I'm looking from the standpoint is if we take the large commercial centers that we have now,
yeah,
and they need to repave. Okay, would they then have to meet the new requirements?
I don't think they'd have to meet them. They would have to meet or exceed them. So they would be, I think we look at it as an allowance to go smaller, not that they have to go smaller.
It would be to their benefit, probably.
Yeah.
So if they can restripe essentially and squeeze a few extra spaces in there, that's typically what they're going to be interested in. But there's a whole different rubric that applies as to whether or not they have to do new stormwater improvements, and that's based on the level of improvement or redevelopment they're doing to their property.
So those are minimums. Rarely do we see it.
The center was a large center that we would have in the city.
Yes.
if they were to come in and completely remodel everything, everything and include the park, then they would then be required to meet these new requirements. There's got to be a level where there's 20, 30, 40% rebuild
Yeah,
or.
but for example, like the compacts, we allow them to go up to 50%.
Okay.
They could, well, right now we allow up to 40. They don't have to go up to 40.
Okay.
They can choose. Some places may want to go 40. Some may want to go, I only want 10%. It depends what they are. If you're a business where you know a lot of trucks are coming, you may only want to say, I want 10 or 15% compact, and I want the bigger stalls and the wider drive aisles for the pickup trucks that are coming pick up lumber or whatever. Somebody ready? Jim, did you have a question?
I
thought-
Hal?
I had a question. Most of what you've talked about up to this point has been residential development. Now
Okay.
you're talking, it sounds like mostly commercial. But to get back to residential, one of my concerns when you talk about parking, specifically trucks and cars and the size of vehicles, is that, you go in areas like on Cordero, or you go in Madrona Heights, or you go on Aberdeen over in Fairway Point, where you have narrow streets, low frontage setbacks, and you've got a lot of homeowners who have Suburbans or Ford F-350s, and because they don't fit, they're sticking out in the street. Now you got vehicles sticking out into a residential street. Some of those are neighborhoods where there's kids running around. It creates a safety issue, a quality of life issue. I can see maybe decreasing sizes for commercial developments where people aren't going to be parked overnight, and you're not having a lot of kids running around, but I'm concerned about it when you talk about residential.
You have a legitimate concern, and it goes back to what Steve said about that balancing of pressures, because we have to do the LID, and with the street sections we have right now, there's the cookie cutter street sections in the code have parking lanes, either one on each side or one on one side. I think some of the streets you mentioned might be private streets that were allowed because they were dead ends to be narrower, but there aren't a whole lot of those. They're legitimate concerns, and what I don't have a good answer other than what I'm seeing is that people are going to have to think more about where they live and say, if I'm a suburban type guy, I need to buy in a neighborhood where I have parking, and that's how I am. But if I'm going to drive a Honda Fit, this neighborhood may work well. Now I know, I didn't fall off the turnip truck the other day, so I know people buy houses well. Thinking about that, believe me, they don't think about a lot of things when they buy houses, but at least some don't. So there will be those. They're basically social pressures that. There is no magic answer, and Steve's coming over to say something.
No, I wanted to add into that because I think it's important to acknowledge that the city has learned some things as well over the years. So Cordero was one of the first examples where we used an older process in the code to consider a narrower street through the private street mechanism. And so we did learn some painful lessons over the years, and I think one thing we've learned is that private streets just aren't a good idea, and so we've really moved away from those. The codes that Brad was talking about before we adopted in 2011, the flexibility that we put in there were the direct results of the hard lessons that we learned in trying to do this in an ad hoc basis. So we've learned quite a bit about how those narrower sections work or don't work. The other thing I think that we've learned a lot about is the issue of the depth of the driveway. That it may be okay to have that smaller lot, and it may be desirable to push the house forward, but you also see us then requiring that the garage be set back far enough so that we have a decent sized driveway in front of the garage, because none of us actually believe that parking takes place in the garage anymore. And so there are some examples out there where it's not working as well as it should, but we've learned from that, and I think our code will help us eliminate those mistakes in the future.
And that was a lot. We discussed that in our stakeholders groups, both our internal, external, and
Pretty
talked about the
extensively.
driveways. Talked about it a lot because Steve's right. Modern homes don't come with outbuildings. Their possessions go in the garage often. Some people keep their cars in the garage. Some people keep their bikes and kayaks and barbecues in there, and there's no room. So one way around that is push that garage back and have room for 3 or 4 cars in front of it. We know in Fireside there's a lot of 3-car garages and a lot of driveways, you can probably put 3-4 cars outside the garage easily. So those are something we have to think about maybe as we go through that, the street design standards where we have the flexibility when somebody comes in and says, well, you know what, I don't want to take the cookie cutter street section with parallel parking. I want to do a narrower here. That might be where we say, well, where are you going to park? If they don't say, I'm going to have a parking court here, 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 then we're probably saying, well, you better get a 6-car driveway or something, or you better 2 in the garage and 4 in front, which if you think about it, most houses have at least 2 in the garage and 2 in the front anyways. But if they're really not going to use their garage and there's no park on the street, maybe they'll get 3 or 4 in front of the garage. And those are things we might have to figure out as we go, and they want to start getting away from the cookie cutter standards.
Actually, about 20 minutes.
One quick question, and forgive me if this is wrong, but this is my first look at this being new to the commission. I'm thinking about Title 17 and building permits. How is this going to affect an existing residence if somebody wants to do remodels, additions, or say in the instance of fire damage and they need to rebuild the structure? Are they then going to be forced to comply with new stormwater retention?
Okay, so I can
relating
answer
back
that.
as well.
So for most remodels, no, because the trigger for low impact development is 2,000 square feet or more of hardened surface, or a clearing of so much land. But in that case, a clearing
In
of so much
addition to
land.
what existed.
Yeah, but the clearing of land won't apply to that situation. If there's significant areas that trigger it, the lowest trigger here in that situation is the addition of new or replaced hard surface, which is defined as impervious surfaces or pervious pavements. So the impervious are roofs, impervious pavements like the traditional pavements, and then the pervious pavements such as pervious asphalt, concrete, or pavers. So a typical addition is not going to be 2,000 square feet of that unless it's a really big house. A house that burnt and gets replaced might trigger it, but the Department of Ecology lowered that standard with the new manual to try to pull in single-family residents, at least any single-family residence of 2,000 square feet or more. Basically, that's including the driveway and walkways, so the roof area, driveways and patios and walkways. So if you're adding a kitchen on, it's not going to trigger it. If you're adding a massive addition, which probably won't fit on most lots in the city, it might trigger it. If you're rebuilding from the ground up, it might trigger it. Now, if the foundation, I think the definition of replaced includes stripping it down to the foundation. So if the house burnt down the foundation, they reuse it, it would still trigger it if that 2,000 square foot threshold was triggered. But most, little projects are not going to trigger. What they will trigger, not LID, but they'll trigger a very minor requirement to make sure if they're out there doing some digging for the foundation, maybe they're adding on a sunroom and they're digging the foundation, that their contractor or whoever's doing the work has to be aware of and consider that they cannot allow mud and dirt to leave the site. Now, most small projects, if there's a yard, it's hard for it to leave the site, but if it's on a hill and there's a lot of water flowing through there, it could leave the site and get into the system, the storm drain system. So maybe they have to put some silt fence out there or straw. That's pretty easy to do. It's going to be a little different for people because they're not used to doing that on those little projects, but it won't trigger them putting a rain garden in their yard or putting in a pervious driveway.
Just real quickly, I'll touch on Title 20 and Title 21. We're getting a little short on time, but environment, we just updated some of the definitions and did some references to the manual and updated a guidance manual in there as well. Title 21, we pretty much discussed what we did there. We also amended the street design standards that were encompassed in that section. And we also enhanced the submittal requirements to make sure that we have the proper information, soil studies, geotechnical reports up front so that we can do our job as far as determining whether LID is a feasible mechanism for that subdivision. And one other note on this document, it's pretty sizable, I admit, but what we did was before each title, identify by red text the chapters that were amended and included the entire chapter. So, that's why it's kind of voluminous. But we figured it would be important to have the intent and purpose of that chapter to really reflect and review the proposed amendments to those chapters. So, with that, do you have any questions on this document at all? If not, I'd like to talk about next steps. Yeah. Yes, sir.
To your attention, Chapter 1726, 210, limited liability. You don't have to answer this now. I wish our attorney was here. In the form of that paragraph, it says that nothing contained in this chapter or in the IVC is intended to be or shall be construed to create or form the basis of any liability on the part of the city, et cetera, for damages resulting from the failure of property or structure to conform to the provisions. In other words, it's written so that the city doesn't have any liability for imposing these standards, which if you take a look at situations where you may be built on a slope, a hillside, that if you're containing water, you're diverting water, stormwater runoff, you're capturing it, and as we all know, we have subsurface lenses of different gradients of soil where we create a diversion of that stormwater, which may be transferring onto somebody else's property. So if we're putting a requirement that we have to do this and it creates damage to other people's property, how can we contract our way out of liability?
You're right, we're not gonna answer that one.
But I would like to get a comment from.
We'll be happy to have Mrs. Suarez give you.
Okay. Thank you. When am I gonna get that answer?
I'll get back to you. Yes, an RFA.
Yeah, I learned that last night.
I know.
Okay, next steps. Obviously, today we are meeting in a joint style. We are looking at next Tuesday to present in an open public hearing format for the Planning Commission. We are also looking at, in November, requesting from the Planning Commission that we have a special meeting somewhere in the second week in November, probably not the 8th since that's Election Day.
We're targeting
The 9th, to actually close the public hearing and ask for a recommendation. That'll give the Planning Commission members an additional couple of weeks to review this document. We will be coming forth back to the City Council before your public hearing then, and I think that's the second meeting in November, the 15th, and asking for adoption on December 6th. So that's the plan. Hopefully we'll have sufficient opportunity to review the document. Obviously the first quarter of 2017, then we're going to have to do some other additional work to meet conformance with our permit requirements, and that includes education outreach to designers, owners of large vacant parcels, and developers. There's going to be a lot of educational component to this, which also brings up the point too, we understand this isn't a perfect draft at this point in time. There are still some points that will need some refinement. We will be working on those diligently so that we can actually have a code that we can live with and will be conformant with our permit requirements. But we also know that once we start implementing the code and using it for developments, we will probably come across some areas that will need some tweaking on in the future. We understand that. We'll just have to see where those areas are that don't seem to work quite well for us, and then probably coming back with potential code amendments on that whenever that happens.
So Dennis, you have from the Department of Equality, you have this list, laundry list of you shall do's. And at this point, you pretty much think you've incorporated most of that.
That's actually a piece of material I am working on as we speak to have that ready for Planning Commission review. Yeah, and it meets those considerations, the subtopics and the general topics that I presented to you in the past. we'll have that spreadsheet that shows conformance.
What kind of input have you gotten from the outside developers, builders? You mentioned that you have communicated with SIC, but have you gotten?
We haven't had the opportunity to present this draft to them.
Okay.
We'll also utilize the city's webpage to get this out. I'll make a special note to our external stakeholders group that this is available for review, so, you know, they'll be plugged into the process as well.
Okay.
Bob, as we developed this code, we took into consideration the many hours of discussion we had with that group.
Okay.
And the main thing we took away from that was is design for flexibility. The Department of Ecology manual and the MPDS permit and the LID assistant guidance manual document, those are prescriptive in a lot of ways. And where we could choose to be prescriptive, we've chosen to try to retain as much flexibility in this as possible. There are a few things we'll probably have to be prescriptive about and make some choices that just need to stick with for efficiency or cost reasons. But the main thing was they wanted was flexibility, and we've tried very hard to achieve that.
Yeah, what little tiny bit I've read here, it does, I have seen that word on
Okay.
several, yeah, so good for you.
I have the same question, Mayor, about the, one of the screens showing public outreach, the building and construction industries, they have an input. And when you get those feedback, you're going to give us the planning commission and the council.
We would give an
Feedback
update on
on
any
the
comments that we
building.
received, especially, you know, in particular, any changes to the draft that we would want to bring forward and agree with. Yeah.
You mentioned the complying with the 2012 manual. Is there a more current manual, or is that the most current?
That's the most current. It was released in 2012, and there was a comment period, and then they took the comments on the manual and updated it to 2014. So if you went on the internet, you could find the 2012, and you'll find a little thing on the website says 2012 with 2014 updates, and that's the one that's most current, the one with the 2014 updates.
And along with that, how often do they update that manual, and when will we have to sort of adjust
See,
this
there were-
to apply with the next one, and
When I
how often is it done?
Started my career, I was working under the 92 manual. I think that was the first one. And there was the 01, then the 05. And then the 12, but really, you know, we haven't adopted 12. I mean, there was a 12, and then the 2014 update of the 12, and now we're going to be adopting that. So it's sporadic, I guess. I don't know if this one will be updated soon. I think this is where they want it to be.
So that ends, oh, I'm sorry, Bruce.
The developments that might be out there in the queue, okay, they've got
Yes.
their plat authorization, okay, that's where it comes back into the grandfathering in. If they're in that queue already, and this has to take place, or take effect January 1, how does that affect those that are in the queue?
Well, depending where they are in the queue, some are vested. And Steve, can you help me with what vests them for? Well, it depends whether it's commercial or.
The real key here is that applications vest to the development regulations in place at the time that they're determined to have a complete application. So if it's something that we have a formal application and we've done that official step to say it's complete, and that's what we call our notice of application, then they're under the old rules. Something that they have just kind of sort of talked to us about, but they haven't made an actual application, unless that application is made and determined to be complete before this is adopted, then they'll be subject to the new rules. Yeah.
Okay, then, along with that, we have town home development, the infrastructure is all in, and this was done about 8 or 9 years ago, but nothing has been built other than just the infrastructure. If that developer now comes in and says, okay, I'm trying to pull a permit, something like that, it never materialized. They got so far as the infrastructure, but nothing's ever been built.
The lots are created.
So there are a couple of different thresholds for vesting, right? and it goes back to that code amendment that Kamak worked with both of you on, both bodies on here just recently, and there are too many timelines in there for me to keep it straight.
Yeah.
But there is a time period by which, after it's approved, that it's still good, even if nothing has happened. And then there's a different time period that if the lots were created but no homes were built, then it's good for. So the good news, I think, from our perspective, is that we have just a couple of plats out there right now that are in that kind of state, and they would probably be able to be built on well before this takes place.
Staff is done with the presentation. If there's any additional questions, we'd be happy to answer those. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. We're adjourned.